My name is Robert Shaw. I was a member of the Third Army when I was overseas. Actually, I went to OCS and then went, for some reason, they flew me over to England. Well, we don't know what we were there for, but eventually I ended up in Paris, and we didn't know what we were going to do there, and we could have stayed there for a while, but one of our buddies said, "Hey, what are you going to do with this?" And he said, "Well, I'm going to get you out of here." So we went through the replacement setup, and I ended up with the 177th Field Artillery Battalion, which was the 20th Corps, and Third Army, which was right in the middle of the whole thing. As far as the Battle of the Bulge was concerned, we were down at a place near Stuttgart, Germany, which is fairly far south. And of course, when they said, "Let's go," and we had to go up to Bastogne, it was snowing and the roads were slick. And of course, half tracks were all messed up because they had summer tracks on them. So everywhere you turned around, there was a half track in the ditch, and we had to pull them out. But we eventually got up to the Bastogne area, and I ended up with about half of our artillery battalion with me because I was a motor officer, but we really didn't know where we were going. So we just kept going. Finally, I got to this one place. He said, "Well, the Germans are right up there." And I said, "Well, I better turn around." Fortunately, we were in a little town where they had a circle, so we could finally got our cars turned around. I finally found out where we were supposed to go. So we, as I said, we were supporting the 4th Armored Division. Their combat command, I think it was Charlie, was the one that broke into Bastogne, and our battery of artillery was right behind. And here are the dead Germans all over the place, and the infantry. You've seen the pictures with the rifles. And we get settled, and we set up our position there. And of course, immediately the Germans fly over and start bombing us at night. They only had a couple of old planes, and we shot down one of them. And which was interesting, one of the anti-aircraft half-tracks had the 450 multiple 50s in it, and he was right in the middle of our position. And the commanding, or the guy that was running it, was a little Mexican, and he got really excited, and they dropped. So when he was shooting at the German planes, and he got credit for one, they spotted him and dropped a bomb, and it hit right beside the half track and moved it over about 3 feet while he was sitting in it. And then the next morning, he grabbed a hold of me. "Lieutenant, I gotta have some ammunition." He shot everything he had. Well, anyway, we finally worked out of Bastogne, I think, and let's see, from there, well, ask me a question.
How was the weather?
The weather was cold. It was snowed, and there was probably a good foot of snow on the ground, and that was another interesting thing. We ended up in a big barn, and there was quite a bit of hay in there, so everybody got hay packed around. And this one guy we had these sleeping bags that were form-fitting, and they weren't much good, but this one guy had one on, and he was also in another sleeping bag. And somewhere in the middle of the night, he turned over, and the sleeping bag didn't. And he thought he was being captured, I think, or something. So he woke up, and he couldn't get out of this sleeping bag. He was screaming and hollering. Well, we finally got him taken care of. Then, let's see, we went on, finally, after we got out of Bastogne, we went on to up to the Rhine and crossed and went on through Germany. And it was one of the things that saved me in crossing through the Rhine. We all had trench foot. Our shoes or boots were lousy, and they were supposed to be waterproof, but they surely weren't. So everybody had trench feet. And I've seen a deuce and a half go by with bare feet sticking out the sides because all these people had taken their boots off and they were taking them back to the hospital, I guess. So during the Siegfried line, I captured me some rubber boots, and boy, they saved my feet. And eventually they, once we crossed the Rhine, we did that in the early morning. They did put in a pontoon bridge, and we had suppressed the Germans enough so we didn't have too much trouble getting through that. And once I got over there, they decided I was going to be an aerial observer, so they put me in a Cub, and I got to fly around the rest of the time I was over there going across Germany, which was nice in a way that we could see quite a bit of the country from up above. And we we got clear over to where we could see Dresden, which was the big city that was bombed and turned and set on fire. And we could see that in the distance, and that as far east as I got. Then they pulled me back, and I was sent down to Austria. And I don't know what I got into there. They gave me about 3 trucks and said, go get those prisoners out of there. So that was the best deal I had the whole time, because we went way up in the Alps. I don't remember where it was. And there was a big DP camp there. Well, first we pulled out a bunch of Romanians, and there must have been about 50, and then God, what a mess. But we took them down to the airfield, and then we went back. And while we were down there, we had to move some British prisoners. And these guys had been prisoners for 4 or 5 years, and yet the sergeant major that was in charge had them all lined up in formation and everything else. The rest of the guys were just one mob, but not the British. And so when I went up to report to him, he saluted, and I replied, and I said, all right, Sergeant, have your men fall out. We were going to haul them down to the airfield and get in the trucks. He said, beg your pardon, sir, these guys have been prisoners for 4 or 5 years. They need to be told what to do. And I said, okay, carry on, Sergeant. And he went down the line, and he'd get each group, and he'd say, you get in this truck, and you get in to lead them right down there, which was really nice. So we took them out. And then we met the Germans, and again, back up in way up in the Alps there, all of a sudden this guy said, Lieutenant Shaw, there's some Germans looking for you. I said, I don't know when. Oh, there they go. And here was a major and a captain and a guard. And this guard scared the hell out of me. He was about 6'2" or 3", husky guy, real slim. He carried his submachine gun right this way. And his face was like looking at a dinner plate, no expression at all. And I just had to think that if you turned around, he'd shoot you just as soon as he did. So I always kind of kept my eye on him. But the DPs were celebrating, having a dance in one of the buildings there, and the major heard it, and he said, let's go over there. So we walked over. As soon as that German walked in that building, everything just shut down. Nobody moved. And he was going to say, I forgot what the German word was, start it up, or whatever it was. And finally a violin said, eventually I said, let's get out of here. So we got him out of there, and eventually got him back over the line. But I said that was the best part of my tour over there. So,
Sure, yeah.
They talked a lot about the friction between the Americans and the British. And in fact, they even say that Hitler tried to exploit it. How real was it, at least from your perspective?
How real what?
The friction between American troops and British troops.
Friction.
I didn't see that part of it. I wasn't in, most of what happened in Britain before the war, because the way they stationed the troop unit I joined with had been over, they were stationed in Wales, not Britain, but they still had contact with local people, and I guess the way some of them handled it, they didn't get along too well. I think the Welsh were a lot easier to go, but the British, for some reason, got resentful. Plus the fact, I think one of the big problems was the Americans taking over the English girls and didn't go over very well with the English boys or so forth. So, but that was, I guess, part of the war. And I think that probably was as much of anything between the two peoples as anything. As far as my experience was, I had no problems at all, but I actually spent more time in Scotland than I did in England, and so that was great. But I was there for about a week, and we had a nice time, and it was really one of the funny experiences I had. I went to Texas A&M it's a military school, and we were all commissioned right away almost because we just about finished, and so we were in. Let's see, the Glasgow, we went out to, what's that lake? Gosh, can't think. Anyway, there's a big lake up there which is quite famous.
Close to what?
Huh?
Close to what? The lake was
Glasgow.
Glasgow?
Loch Lomond?
Huh?
Loch Lomond?
Loch Lomond, yeah. And we went out there, and there's quite a crowd, and this other guy and I had been together the whole time. We were walking up across the tape, and they had two boats that would take us up and down like an excursion boat. I was looking around, and I didn't see this guy pull a rope in front of us, and I almost fell over. And then I heard somebody behind me say, "Wasn't that just like Shaw not paying attention?" I turned around, here were about 5 guys from my class, and I never even knew they were around. So it's amazing how you run into different people occasionally overseas, and did the same thing after the war. The unit I trained with in the States, I went over separately as a replacement. It wasn't until the end of the war, I was driving a Jeep down the road. I was going something to do near Munich, and all of a sudden I saw this truck, 177 Field Artillery. "Where are you going?" And he said, "Follow me." And sure enough, so I ran into the guys that I'd trained with, but had gone over separately. So it was quite interesting. Can't think of much else to say now, but eventually I got home. I had to go back on a boat, so I didn't. But we spent about a week in Paris. Well, we weren't in Paris. We were in a cigarette camp. It was about 20 miles from Paris, but trucks are going back and forth. So we go into Paris and maybe spend 2 or 3 days and then go back.
What's a cigarette camp? What is that?
That's what they called them. They were just named as Chesterfield, Lucky Strike. They were just camps where they were assembling. At the end of the war, you counted up points. Everybody had so many points for time service, time in different things. And I think 120 was a break-off point. Anybody with less than 120 stayed in Europe. If you got over that, you were supposedly sent back to the States. But somewhere along the line, it got to, if you're going to the States, then you're going on over to the Middle East to finish the war over there. Well, that wasn't too great either. But fortunately, by the time we got back to the States, the Pacific War ended, so we didn't have to go back over there. And so some of the guys that had just come over were sent back first so they could go over the Pacific. And unfortunately for them, the war ended, so they never had to get out of the States again. And they were all back first before the rest of us who'd been over there for a couple of years had to spend our time getting back. So that was great. We finally got back home and settled down. So thank you.
Did you find that the people in the small towns, whenever the Germans were chased out and the Americans came in, were they thankful?
Oh yes, a lot of them were. Yeah, we had better relations with the Germans than we did with the French. Probably because course, the troops are over in the France were stationed in places, and the French people were not very happy to being, I guess, even though we helped them out and
Yeah.
helped the Germans out, they still had sort of a chip on their shoulders for some reason, and not all of them, but a few, but the Germans, of course, they welcomed you with open arms almost. It was very happy to be
And
liberated.
Belgium.
Right.
So,
The Belgium, I didn't have too much to do in there other than that Bastogne, and most of my contacts were just separate. We never really got into the Belgian towns. So, I mean, or with the people, except one time, and I don't know how this other lieutenant worked it, but he apparently found a Belgian family and talked them into giving us a dinner. All we had was K rations most of the time, so about 5 of us went. It was a nice home out in the country. We sat around a big table like this, and they served it. That was a beautiful meal, and I don't know how they did it with their rations, because they had really had short rations most of the time. But they were really wonderful, and appreciated our liberating them, I guess. So it was that we had some nice times as well as some of the tougher ones. So
well,
thank you.
Thank you so much for your service and for our freedom.
Well, thank you.
It was a collective effort. Thank you for sharing.